has Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley just exposed the myth that a multi-ethnic coalition could eventually defeat white supremacy? In this year of white anxiety, there is already much talk of racial fertility rates, the Great Replacement theory, intercommunal alliances, and how Third World migration will accelerate Western democracy's inexorable decline. French President Emmanuel Macron's plans for demographic rearmament, announced last week, placed the nation's white wombs on a war footing. The United Nations reports that 2/3 of countries in Europe have introduced measures to increase fertility rates, from baby bonuses and tax incentives to paid parental leave. Italy gives €800 to parents of newborn children. According to the Guardian newspaper, Hungary's Viktor Orbán spends around 5% of GDP on fertility policies. In his 2019 State of the Nation address, The Guardian quotes Orbán as saying,
"In all of Europe there are fewer and fewer children, and the answer of the West to this is migration. They want as many migrants to enter as there are missing kids, so that the numbers will add up. We Hungarians have a different way of thinking. Instead of just numbers, we want Hungarian children. Migration for us is surrender."
Whilst Europeans worry about migration numbers, Americans are transfixed by the year 2045. In 25 short years, the country is due to become minority white, according to a census prediction. This year's election will see the usual pitch to racial minorities to support mostly white Republicans or Democrats, and near-endless media surveys of the rage of poorer whites who complain that they are losing the country. What is for sure is that even after 2045, it is fanciful to imagine America's non-white racial groups pooling their votes to challenge white domination. This myth is the catnip of America's far right. It gained legs during Obama's second term, but it was roundly exposed as a fantasy by Nikki Haley's recent observation that America is not a racist country. Nimrata Randhawa Haley doubled down on previous silliness when asked to justify a claim that America has never been racist. Rather the world laugh at her deliberate underplaying of a foundational theme of the United States, than a primary voter react to historical accuracy and vote for anyone but Haley. Yet, some may argue that Haley, the daughter of Indian immigrants, was not being entirely disingenuous. Maria Cardona, writing in The Hill, certainly began her article in that vein.
When the former South Carolina governor stated that America has never been a racist country, she was right, if you look at it the way most immigrants see the promise of the United States. My parents came here because they saw the potential to get ahead, for us kids to get a quality education, have a brighter future and do anything we set our minds to. This promise was not afforded to us in our home country of Colombia. Growing up, my parents flew the American flag proudly every July 4th on our front porch, voted in every election after becoming naturalized citizens, and always spoke with admiration and awe about being blessed to be able to raise their children in the greatest country in the world.
What Cardona hoped to get across to readers is the idea that non-white people who move to America in search of a better life cannot let themselves get distracted or over-emotional about the country's profound attachment to racist ideology. The main reason for this social laissez-faire is the simple fact that the most virulent form of American racism is aimed at its black citizens. Cardona then pulled the media pundit's favorite bait and switch trick. She smashed down her own argument and built another.
As someone who is seeking election to the highest office in the land, to lead the most diverse country in the world, Haley's answer was dead wrong, and it makes her unfit to occupy such a position.
Cardona then listed the insults that her Colombian parents suffered as they chased the American dream.
At work, my father, an engineer for the phone company, was called wetback behind his back and was resented when he got promoted over his peers. I was made fun of when I spoke Spanish in front of my friends and was often asked if my father was a drug lord. But my father never let that set him back or keep him from working twice as hard, to prove he was just as good, or better, than his white counterparts. And he and my mother instilled nothing but pride in us about our language, our heritage, and our culture, while at the same time never letting us forget how lucky we were to call ourselves American.
Put the humble bragging to one side, and what rings true from Cardona's description of her childhood is the double consciousness, or cognitive dissonance that non-white people experience in predominantly white spaces. You must remain grateful whilst you are treated as a curiosity, or sometimes with contempt. Optimism in the face of obstacles is your only recourse. The prospect of riches triumphs over psychological peace. Cardona concludes her article with more condemnation.
Haley tried to have it both ways, to kowtow to Trump's MAGA base, taking care not to offend him, or any of those who traffic in racism and xenophobia, while trying to differentiate herself from Trump in a milquetoasty but meaningful way. Haley fails miserably at both and demonstrates why someone who cannot acknowledge America's racist and xenophobic past, and its ongoing challenges with racism and anti-immigrant sentiment at present, is unfit to unify this great country in common purpose for a better future for all.
Only after this peroration did readers learn that Maria Cardona is a longtime Democratic strategist, a principal at a Washington-based political consulting agency, and a CNN pundit. Oops. Despite the partisanship, it is hard to disagree with Cardona's analysis. What is missing, however, is the understanding that the daughter of Indian immigrants, who rose to become a pillar of the American establishment, is hardly likely to be crying into her Chardonnay glass about the adverse effects of racism on her life. In general terms, Indian immigrants do have to negotiate annoying cultural stereotypes and racist bullying, but neither has stopped many a South Asian from cutting a swathe through the business, tech, legal, medical, academic, and media sectors over the past 40 years. In politics, Vice President Kamala Harris is biracial. Her mother, Shyamala Gopalan, settled in the USA from India and became a cancer specialist. The parents of failed Republican presidential candidate Vivek Gunputty Ramaswamy also emigrated from India to America. In the United Kingdom, Rishi Sunak became the first British Indian to be confirmed as finance minister, and then, the country's first non-white prime minister. Priti Patel, the daughter of Ugandan Indian immigrants, held the position of Home Secretary, as did Sala Braverman, who also has roots in India. In Scotland, Anas Sarwar, a Scottish Pakistani, became the leader of the Scottish Labour Party in 2021, only to be eclipsed 2 years later by Hamza Yousaf, who became Scotland's first minister. In Ireland, Leo Varadkar, the son of an Indian immigrant, served as the country's prime minister from 2017 to 2020. Outstanding Asians are now so commonplace across the globe that Rishi Sunak's UK premiership is rarely, if at all, questioned on racial terms. Would that be the same for a leader who could trace his ancestors back to the African Holocaust? Now, the mere mention of such a racial comparison invites derision.
Another black complaining of a world racial conspiracy. More black moaning, 1,000 teardrops and more oppression Olympics. More black exceptionalism, etc., etc., etc.
Black people are constantly reproached for blaming others for our position at the bottom of a global racial hierarchy. We stand accused of denying the role and importance of black cultural pathologies, black anti-intellectualism, and the black obsession with the past, which are mainly responsible for keeping us where we are. This point of view also posits that Asians compete in white spaces without handouts. Generally, non-Muslim Asian communities demonstrate, generation after generation, an entrepreneurial flair for business, a commitment to academic excellence and high levels of individual integrity, personal discipline, and family loyalty that lead to high marriage and savings rates. These are the ingredients of success and have delivered the high reputation that such communities enjoy currently. Look closely, and it is clear to see that non-Muslim South Asians have pursued the Jewish path to integration, with spectacular results. This business and education before politics strategy leaves them and other similarly minded groups dividing the spoils at the capitalist table, whilst blacks, Roma, and indigenous peoples are outside with their noses pressed to the plate glass window, jealous of the party going on, and envious of those with invitations to the banquet of plenty. This is the universal caste system that Nikki Haley revealed in her disavowal of America as a racist country. Whilst compliments to South Asians are entirely merited, it is not entirely true to say that these communities have succeeded in white spaces without help. Everywhere you find South Asians, you find black people who have been used as a control group, with dominant whites playing a game of racial favorites at black expense. The game goes as follows. Blacks in the lowest caste make an emotional appeal to the liberal conscience of powerful whites, who are placed in the highest caste. This usually follows a series of racial incidents, or when the long-standing deplorable conditions of the caste system become impossible to ignore. At key moments, these appeals solicit an easing of racial restrictions, which helps some blacks in the higher echelons of the lowest caste to progress socially and economically. Yet, years later, when the statistical data is examined, it becomes clear that middle-class blacks were not the only group to benefit from white liberal conscience. Not only did the black working class fail to make the expected gains, but black people were bypassed by other ethnic groups. These groups usually did not complain directly, nor did they offer anything more than sympathy to the black revolt, but they nevertheless reaped the rewards of ethnic promotion, quotas, or indulgence forfeited by whites. This is the caste system at work. It is defined by race, with darker-skinned people occupying the lowest positions. As the white population declines globally, so almost every ethnic group, apart from Africans, New World blacks, Roma, indigenous peoples, and some Muslim communities, has seen its fortunes soar. It is true that some black men and women have risen to extraordinary heights in the 600 years that we have been part of the Western story. But these successes are the exceptions rather than the rule. Black distress is so obvious, our lack of confidence so transcendental, the desire so frantic for faster change, that black people are now obsessed with the idea that we need to be fixed, because the caste system cannot be broken. These fears and this animus lie at the heart of some of comedian Dave Chappelle's deeper jokes, and explain why intercommunal solidarity is so rare and so fragile. The West Indian island of Trinidad is seething with racial antipathy because blacks feel they have lost the country to Asian men and women. Blacks say that Asians were given preferential treatment by British colonial authorities over many decades, allowing the Asian community to build up superior professional experience and an unassailable economic and wealth advantage. After independence, blacks took political control of the country, but in recent years, on the back of a demographic explosion, Asians have asserted their political and economic dominance. Black racial resentment was also the main reason why Rishi Sunak's own parents were forced out of their comfortable existence in Uganda. Here's a report from Britain's independent television on the 1972 expulsion of East African Asians by Uganda's fearsome Idi Amin.
The British, having brought Indians to the region, had invested in the education of the Asian minority during colonial times in preference to the indigenous Ugandans. By the early 1970s, many Indians in East Africa and Uganda were employed in the sartorial and banking businesses. Indophobia was already ingrained by the start of President Amin's rule in 1971. While not all Ugandan Asians were well off, they were on average better off than the indigenous communities. They constituted 1% of the population while earning a fifth of the national income.
As Uganda went, so did neighboring Kenya and everywhere else that Asians were pitted against blacks by the white racial ringmaster. For example, in the United Kingdom, Keith Vaz was the only Asian among 4 black MPs entering Parliament for the first time in 1987. Since then, the number of MPs of South Asian origin has come to dwarf the number of representatives with African roots. This is probably because Britain's South Asian population is greater than the total number of Africans and Caribbeans. The Asian community's economic contribution to the nation is much more significant. All these factors combine to ensure that blacks in the UK, though culturally powerful, trail non-Muslim South Asians where it really matters, in accruing wealth, professional occupations, and academic attainment. Whilst British blacks enjoy iconic status as singers, rappers, designers, athletes, and sportsmen, with a sprinkling of politicians and media personalities, South Asians are to be found in massive numbers in medicine, science, technology, accounting, law, government, private enterprise, and so on. Economist Thomas Sowell, who is black, has examined situations like the one in the UK. He scoffs at the idea that systemic barriers prevent Black people from enjoying the same opportunities and status as other groups. Sowell has little time for racial grievance mongering, and his career as a public commentator on race matters is peppered with withering assessments of Black people's actions in favor of their own uplift. In Sowell's analysis, Black culture and liberal indulgence are now the major obstacles to Black progress. Here are just a few of his pithy dismissals of Black excuse-making.
The word racism is like ketchup. It can be put on practically anything, and demanding evidence makes you a racist. The Black families survived centuries of slavery and generations of Jim Crow, but it has disintegrated in the wake of the liberals' expansion of the welfare state. Much of the social history of the Western world, over the past 3 decades, has been a history of replacing what worked with what sounded good. There are only 2 ways of telling the complete truth, anonymously and posthumously.
Sowell's bitter medicine is painful to digest. This surely explains why Sowell is a hero among right-wing American think tanks, desperate for Black endorsement of the caste system, but remains something of a pariah for the Black left. So is Sowell a deluded fool, or a truth-teller? Is fixing Black people the faster route to racial progress, or should attention be focused on dismantling the universal caste system that operates to permanent Black disadvantage? These questions are for another podcast. Please like and share this episode. Whilst you're here, please subscribe to this channel to receive all of our videos and podcasts as soon as they are released. Thanks for listening.